And also, if you read these texts, I mean, some of them are very strange. I mean, some of them indicate that the resistance to women was not so much doctrinal but personal. Peter, whom I think I have rounded out a little bit in my opera, but Peter is the absolutely unmistakable villain of the Gnostic Gospels. It is in Peter that you get, make Mary leave us, for females are not worthy of this life. However, in the same gospel, you also get Jesus saying, I shall make her male, like the rest of you males, and then she will be worthy to enter the kingdom of heaven, which is a pretty disturbing thing to say, And yet it is the same document that in which is quoted, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. So again, doctrinally, that's problematic. But if you look at that somewhat anti-feminist statement, and then square it with the later feminist statements in the later texts, which is quite comparable to looking at the Jesus of the Synoptic Gospels, who does not want any truck with the Gentiles. And in fact, in Matthew, he instructs his disciples quite specifically not to go among the Gentiles. And then in John, you get God does not care if you are Jew or Greek or Samaritan or Levite or circumcised or uncircumcised, all are one in Christ Jesus. If you look at that doctrinally, it's endlessly problematic. If you look at it dramatically, if you say, gosh, maybe this guy started here and ended here.
Or maybe he was writing for the Greeks.
I beg your pardon?
Maybe he was writing for the Greeks.
Well, historically, that is true. That as the Jesus movement went on, it became more and more internationalist precisely because it found more and more dissonances with what was rapidly become a Jewish orthodoxy. But as a dramatist, what I have is a text that has Jesus at one stage here, and then a later document having him at another stage here. And so, as a playwright, you think, well, I mean, number one, Jesus is generally the dullest character in any dramatic adaptation because no one gives him an arc. No one gives him something to play. But the Gnostic Gospels, historically, indicate that he had a long road to travel. And if you look at the very strong tradition in the canonical Gospels of the perception of Jesus as an illegitimate child, if you have in Mark, Jesus saying, if you really were the people you say you were, you would know that I was speaking the truth. And the elders say, we were not born of fornication. At which point Mary and his half-brothers come in, and she says, Rabbi, forgive him, he is deranged, he doesn't know what he's saying. And the rabbi says, your mother and brothers are here. And he says, my mother and brothers, who are they? He who does not hate his family cannot enter the kingdom of heaven, and then flees. Now, that doesn't help you in terms of putting together a homily on Sunday, but if you look at that psychologically, here's a guy who was being scorned for being illegitimate. His mother comes in, he scorns her. And then the Gospel of Thomas comes in, but then you also have Mary Magdalene, she whom Jesus loved among all others. Speak, Mary, you whose heart is more turned to the kingdom of heaven than all your brothers, and the Gospel of Mary, in which she is the first resurrection to the resurrection. And that's true in every text. Only the Gospel of Peter, interestingly, denies that scene to her. She is approaching the tomb, she is frightened, she runs away, and Peter is the first of the resurrection. What an interesting detail, given what the Gospel of Philip says about Peter, So, I mean, it was such a treasure hunt dramatically to pull all of this together, and precisely because it did seem so moving, so credible, that a guy who might have started out being more orthodox sexually than Moses because of the heavy load of shame that he was carrying from his own irregular birth, and then possibly through the intercession of this other independent woman, identified by the name of her city, so she's something of an outcast as well. They heal each other, she becomes his principal disciple, and it is from him that we get the feminist, the internationalist, the Jesus that we now know and love. How could you not write that story? I mean, it writes itself. It doesn't write itself, but it kind of writes itself. But I think there is such hunger now to re-examine our religious narratives, and partly because it's not a 9/11 piece, but we're living in a 9/11 world, and so we are aware of the stakes that the misinterpretation of, or the exaggeration of, or the distortion of our religious narratives can lead. So and I think because it's clear now that everyone who asks a question of this tradition is not trying to fell the tree. We're simply trying to continue the conversation, if you will. So in my conversation, and this is young, old, believers, unbelievers, I was at the East Bay Opera Guild the other day, and these were ladies of my mother's generation, whom you would think would be the people who would say, I do not want to see Mary Magdalene and Jesus having a crypto-marital discussion. It is not something I want to see. And these were the ladies who were crowded around me after the lecture, saying, you mentioned this to me and I get chills. And it's occurring to me that even more than the younger people who are going to be interested in it, it's the older audience who has lived through those years and who bear those scars, who may need it even more than the 20-year-olds who think, of course women should be ordained, of course marriage equality, blah, blah, blah.